And I'm just like, no, I think God actually loves us. He designed us as sexual beings. He made us for romance and intimacy and love, but he has boundaries between one man, one woman for a reason, for the actual deepest intimacy, to represent like him and the church and his love for us. God has like these good things for us. It's just we want to do it in our way and our timing. And it's like, he's not trying to control us. He literally is just like, hey, this is like the best way.
Welcome to the Christians Who Date podcast.
Oh. Podcast. Who are
I'm
you?
Andrea Alley.
I'm Lauren Bornique.
And Callie Christopherson.
I feel like I have not started this podcast without laughing in like the last 5 episodes. So
No,
I'm
because
really sorry.
We're always giggling about something.
We're so funny.
There's a level of professionalism that I have not tapped into yet. And so I just want to formally apologize for that.
Also, Lauren was showcasing her nails at the very beginning.
I haven't
Lauren.
I haven't done my nails in, I don't know, like 4 months, and I don't wear makeup really. So
Since you were here.
I feel like a woman today. I'm like, my nails are done. My toes are done. I feel good.
Look out. Same
Yes.
color? Same color on the toes?
Oh, yeah, we're matching today.
Whoa.
We're matching. I know.
I was thinking, you guys, we could call this part of the podcast Girls Be Girlin'.
Always. Did you learn that phrase from like your nephew who's
My
20?
cousin.
Oh, your cousin. I always think it's your nephew.
He's 22.
He's not wrong.
He's 22. Because one of my friend's husbands was listening and he was like, yeah, for the first part, you guys are just being girls.
Girls be girlin'. We
So I
can't.
was like, this is the Girls Be Girlin' part of the podcast.
And you know what? We need this time for ourselves. This is our self-care.
Yes.
It's true.
Is here. But Dre, you had a pretty good encounter with a man this week. And
Yes,
I know
I did.
it changed your life. So please share.
Yeah. So I was at a coffee shop, which Lauren and I talked about how all my like encounters with guys are at coffee shops and all of hers are running or like CrossFit.
True. Callie, what are yours?
And we said Callie's are church. But what do you think yours are, Callie?
Callie's are totally church.
Mine are church or work. Like if I remember when I worked at that one place, Andrea, and you were like, every time you go to work, what happens? I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah.
So those
multiple
are my stats.
places you've worked have been that reality.
Callie is the bachelorette, and whatever environment she goes to, there is like a flock of men. Where for Dre and I, it's like once every 10 months, and that's okay.
Not true. Not true at all. I'm in that group chat with you guys. You're like, okay, today this person did this. So that's not true.
Wait. Don't tell everyone. Don't tell
Andrea.
What happened? Hard to get.
My story. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, it's not about me. It's about Andrea. Andrea.
Okay, so sorry.
Intelligentsia. For those of you that appreciate what
their coffee's
coffee
like
shop.
Average.
Really? It's pretty good in Austin.
Yeah, it's fine.
Wait, are you joking?
They're just overpriced.
Oh. I get a latte on draft and it's cheaper.
That's awesome. Okay, sorry,
it's
continue.
pretty good. But anyway, sorry, focusing. Yeah. So I was sitting outside of Intelligentsia and this guy walks by and, you know, I'm just expecting him to casually walk by as strangers do. But instead he says, hey, are you an alien? Because you're out of this world.
Stop.
And I'm in my head like, he can not possibly be talking to me. Like, this isn't real life. And then I look up and he's looking at me as he's walking by. And he's like, pretty good, right?
No. Stop. What did he look like and what age was he?
Yeah, how old was this man?
He was probably around my age, maybe a little older.
Wow.
And was he attractive to you?
He was, you know what? I gave him like a little chuckle. I was like, I see what you did there. You know, like, haha.
But was he attractive?
But no, I wouldn't have gone. I wouldn't have gone on a date.
She
with
was
him,
avoiding.
If that's what
She
you
was
mean.
avoiding.
He was like nice.
I'm sure he has a great personality.
Yeah, it's always.
But
the
it was
backup.
funny because it was like he wasn't like trying to actually talk to me. Like he was just trying to deliver this line and like keep moving with his life. So I didn't really know what to do with that, you know.
That's
I'm
a
like,
lot.
all right.
You
That's a
know,
lot.
maybe that was him taking a risk, Andrea. Maybe he's like, okay, there's a really cute girl over there. I'm just going to say something and like that'll be my like win for the day. So maybe that was him just, you know, trying.
Dude outside of Intelligentsia, if you're listening right now, good job for shooting your shot and taking a risk.
But he like ran away.
Continuing to walk. Yeah.
Yeah.
Baby steps, Lauren. You got to start somewhere.
Yeah. What if we did a thing where every week we have to like give a pickup line to a random stranger and that's it?
Oh my gosh.
That would be so crazy.
That'd be kind of fun.
I was thinking on the podcast, what if we did like we talked about a move and we talked about like, did this work on you or not?
I mean, you guys have heard some of my moves lately and they're pretty bad.
Yeah.
I've had some bad moves.
I feel like I've had some okay moves, but I honestly don't feel like it ever really works if you make them like. I think the only thing that works that I've seen work as a girl is breaking the ice.
Yes,
yeah,
but very good at that.
If you keep making moves after that, and he is like he's doesn't
not moving,
like it never works. It's just like it's like if he doesn't pick up the like you know.
The cues.
Yeah, if he doesn't pick up the cues early on and start making his own moves, like it's except for Ashley Iaconetti and Jared. That's the only time I've ever seen.
Okay, I was like, who?
It's true. And even then it took literal years. So, and she's a freaking babe and he was pretty average.
She's gorgeous. Wow.
To be honest.
So I don't think they'll listen, so it's probably fine.
Yeah, it's okay.
So there you go. Well, so to all those listening, please do not use that pickup line. It does not work. That's all I gotta say.
Stand still while you say it and then say something else afterwards. That would help.
Yes.
Yeah, it always helps to like actually engage in conversation after, for sure.
Yeah.
I would say that's rule one of breaking the ice.
That's break the ice and then actually like try to engage in
get
conversation.
In the water.
Yes. Yeah.
Don't just
in the water.
Float away from the ice.
That's the reason you broke the ice. Also, that reminded me of The Notebook. Get in the water.
Oh yeah.
Get in the water.
It's like get in it.
Oh,
she does. She gets in the water.
Beautiful, beautiful,
yeah.
heart-wrenching movie.
Totally.
Anyways,
yeah, we're not even going to talk. We're not even going to get into that.
No, we can't touch that.
Lauren, tell us what we are going to get into.
Oh my gosh! Well, today we're going to talk about. Could sound cringy, but I believe it is something very important to talk about. Is how far is too far? And so we're going to talk about physical boundaries and emotional boundaries in dating, and what that looks like in just if you're starting to date, conversations. You probably heard all of us say like at some point we have to talk about boundaries in our dating relationships. And really, if you're dating, you're going to continue to talk about physical and emotional boundaries during that. And when you get married, you're going to be talking about physical and emotional boundaries throughout it. It does not end having those conversations because there's such huge connector points when it comes to any dating relationship that you're having. It's a big piece of how you connect. And so we will be talking about that today and then kind of going into a couple different thoughts on that. Something that I think all of us as Christians, we grew up in this, what we maybe would call like church purity culture. And we were told from a young age, certain things you could do with your body, certain things you can't do with your body as a Christian. And I think throughout the years, we have all had like our own journeys of like, what does that look like in dating and all that. And so, what I'm finding today is Christians are across the spectrum of how far is too far. And that's usually a big question. Like I worked with college students and that when we ever talked about sex and relationships, purity, all of that, they're just kind of like, what's the line? And so that's
me too.
That's the biggest thing is people are kind of like, what can I get away with in dating? And at the end of the day, really it's between like you and God, right? Like most people are not going to know what you're doing behind closed doors. Like it's just, it's true. Unless you're talking about it, like people are not going to know what you and your partner are doing. And so it's a very personal thing. And so it's actually, I would say for all three of us, like a very personal conviction of like what our physical have boundaries have been. And so I would love to hear from like the two of you, like how have you navigated physical boundaries like in your own dating relationships, or like what does that look like for you?
Yeah, so with me, I like just knocked it out of the park with physical boundaries for years. Like, it took me a long time before I like even kissed a guy. So, you know, stellar there for a while. And
Purity plan
then
was intact.
it was the purity plan was working too well. Just kidding.
Keeping everyone away.
Yeah, it was repelling the men. Um, but then when I started dating and getting into more like serious relationships, and where, you know, that was something that we were navigating together, was physical boundaries. It was difficult, honestly, because I think I had in my head like my idea of where my convictions were, and it was really hard when his didn't line up with mine, because I would, you know, I would communicate, and then it felt like we would have a conversation, and then we'd be having the conversation again like a few weeks later, because I feel like there's just such a discrepancy sometimes between like what I felt good about and what they did. Um and so honestly, like it's a hard, especially like you're both bringing your own baggage into the relationship, and depending on what that is, like if it's any kind of history with porn, or you know, any history where you've just like really it just skews your mind sometimes depending on like what you've been exposed to. So it can be really hard sometimes to like find that like place where you both feel like, I don't know, it's hard. I felt like I was always trying to pull them up to my convictions, if that makes sense. And then I'm not great at doing that like over and over again. I think my personality kind of like, I start to doubt myself. Like I'm like, am I being too intense about this? Like, you know, am I like requiring too much, which kind of sucks. And it is like it's a difficult thing to like like it's really hard to have the strength in the moment to immediately stop it. I'll say that too.
Totally.
Like in the moment, you're like you're kissing or whatever, and it's like it's like momentum, I guess. And so to stop that momentum is really difficult. So I feel like usually what happens is like you go too far, and then like, or at least for me, I would go too far, and then I would feel like the conviction, I think, of the Holy Spirit. And I would be really sad. And then there's been like multiple times where I've like cried. And like kind of the guy was kind of like confused, because like in his mind it's like, what, this was like nothing, but for me, like I was really innocent and like for a long time. And so I think, I don't know, it's like, and it wasn't like what I pictured in my head. Like I think in your head you always picture like walking it out perfectly. So
totally, when you're not in a relationship for years, you could walk it out perfectly because you don't have it to be tested, right? Like
totally.
Not until you're actually in it, and then you have two different lives coming together of different boundaries or different expectations, that's when you feel the friction. So
totally. And I'm curious, Andrea, when you've dated somebody and you guys have had like really different boundaries, what have you guys kind of like come to like to decide like, okay, these are our boundaries?
Usually I have told him what I'm comfortable with, and in the moment he agrees to like stick with what I'm comfortable with. But then, I think I guess the way that it like actually plays out is, he'll stick with it for like a few weeks and then would kind of push the boundary.
And this sounds like a very specific relationship. Or has this been several?
There's been a couple that have been like that. Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah. There's been some where I feel like I was maybe closer to pushing the boundaries, but I know what it feels like, so I would not really, because I'm like, it sucks, and like I don't know. But anyway, yeah, I don't know. I feel like more often than not, I've been in the situation where I am like the one who's holding the line. But what about you, Lauren?
Yeah, I think in dating, like I was pretty similar to Dre. I know it sounds crazy, but I don't think I hadn't really kissed a guy from like middle school to age 30. And that was because of my own issues with men of like really keeping them at a distance. Even though I had a ton of guy friends, went on a lot of dates, I was very hurt by men from my family. And so because of that, I think I had kind of like stay away from me. And so for a while I was just like, oh, something's wrong with me. And I was really nervous about like kissing a guy or like being physically intimate with a guy. And then really you figure out like, oh, your body's like made for this. Like it's like very normal. Like you can figure it out so easily. Like it's like I was like, I'm an expert after like a second kissing session with a guy. I was like, I am amazing. I am meant for this. So my confidence came real quick. So I think like the first person I had dated and kissed, we were like on the same page with every physical boundary. So it made it really easy. Like it was almost just like we knew where our line was. We talked about it a little bit, but it was just pretty simple. Like we kiss and that's about it. Like kiss and cuddle. And then another person I dated, I started to date way more in my 30s. And there were some guys that had very different boundaries than I did. And so there was friction. There was friction in conversations of these are this is where my boundaries are. And they're like, well, that's not where my boundaries are. And so I've had some people where that was kind of the point of tension in our dating relationship was I had pretty strict boundaries when it came to physical intimacy and they did not. And so that was really hard for me because I'm not one to just like break up with someone just because I'm like, well, are there people that can bend on this? Is there ways that we can, compromise? But what I found is when those boundaries keep being tested, usually the one who has the more conservative bent, which would have been me, you start to bend and you start to go more to them and wanting, because I think we want connection, especially as women, we want to be connected. Physical connection is a great way to connect with a man. But there's boundaries and seasons within dating, within engagement, and within marriage that I believe like God has for a reason to protect our hearts and our bodies and our minds. There's different seasons for whatever. And so with that was really, really hard because I would say at times I have gone further than I want and I felt so guilty and felt just like, God, like who am I? Like I have lost parts of like this beautiful, pure Lauren that was so innocent. And I had to really wrestle with the Lord and even wrestle with like retrusting myself when I got out of, I'd say, a pretty toxic relationship. I had to really wrestle with like, who am I? And I was like proud of myself in some ways that I held lines, but then other ways I felt like I had like failed myself and failed the convictions I held to because nobody at the end of the day knows them, like knows like what I did unless I tell my friends or family, which I was able to process a lot with them. But at the same time, it's really between you and God and yourself, like at the end of the day, and that person you're in relationship with. And so it's figuring out like, what does that look like? It's really like, who do you want to be before God? Because you can lie and say I didn't do those things, or you don't have to tell anybody. Like it's when it comes to physical sexual intimacy with a partner, it's very hidden. It's behind closed doors. And so, that's why it is like a personal conviction. And some people are like, I'll do whatever I want because I want. I'm like, okay, but how are you and the Lord in that? And some people say God's for it. He's great. He wants me to be happy. But I would say like God has different standards because he actually cares about my heart and mind. Because at the end of the day, if I'm having sex with whoever and it ends up we're not being in covenant or married together, like that sucks. Like that's parts of like the most precious parts of you that you physically gave to someone. And so, I don't know, those are like a couple of thoughts, but yeah, like that's a conversation I'm having pretty quickly when I start to talk to a guy, because it brings us safety when you feel like your boundaries are being honored. That could be physical, emotional, whatever, but for women to feel emotionally safe with their boundaries or standards, it actually brings a lot of intimacy and connection in a dating relationship. And I'm like, that's the key to our heart. If we can feel honored in our bodies and feel honored, like you want us for more than just our bodies, you want us for our hearts and our minds and who we are. Like, I'm like, that's the key. So,
I was going to say,
yeah, go ahead.
Unless you had more.
No, that's good for now. Yeah.
Okay. I was just going to tack on to that I think in every case where a guy pushed my boundary, I think what he was wanting was connection, like deeper connection and deeper intimacy, but it backfired every time because it caused the opposite. Like I was like pushing him away because now I have all this shame. So I don't know if you noticed anything like that, Lauren.
Yeah, there's times where I like shut down. And the more I felt pressure, the more I'd shut down. And then I think at times I've pressured guys, like, and I was like, oh, there's needs I'm wanting. Like, I'm like, I just want to make out, like, let's not talk. And I mean, I don't think anyone minded, but at the same time, I was like, what's going on? Like, what's the real root? Of course, it's great to be physically connected to someone. But also sometimes you're like, oh, I'm needing a need met here. And what, like, physical intimacy is a way to get needs met, but sometimes you actually need God, or you need emotional needs, or you need community, or you need to go like spend time with yourself and reflect. Like, I think there's sometimes people like will just go straight to the physical because it's the easiest, instead of maybe having like hard conversations or having like actual friendship in a relationship. And it can be kind of like the I don't know if it's like the super drive. It's like a way to like quickly for people to connect. But the thing is like there's so much more going on in a relationship. I mean, our friends Tim and Naomi were literally just on a podcast with us we had, and they were like, sex is about 5% of our relationship, like over the scheme of marriage. Yeah. And so I think that's like important to know. It's like, yeah, it's beautiful connector of like physical intimacy and dating, and of course in marriage with sex, but there's so much more that makes up a relationship, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's
Brene. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Cal.
No, you go ahead and I'll tack on after.
Okay, because I had a short thing. But Brene Brown has this phrase. She says hot wiring connection. And she's not actually talking about this, but I feel like that is what you're doing a lot of times when you're pushing the physical, is your hot wiring connection, because the whole dating phase, which is why I love the biblical model for it, but you're meant to be building that emotional connection and compatibility and relationship, and to make sure that you have something that can last for the long haul. And people want to feel that connection, but they don't want to do it the hard way, so they hotwire it, which is through like some kind of physical intimacy.
No, that's so good. And I was just thinking, within culture, it's funny because people are so quick to go for the physical, but when you talk about like emotional connection, that's when people get uncomfortable, which I think is so interesting because I'm like, yeah, I don't know. Maybe because it takes work and that is where real vulnerability is required, which I'm like, there's so much vulnerability in like physical intimacy, but it's just not really the one that culture usually goes for. It's usually physical intimacy. So I think people are just like, ooh, emotional vulnerability requires something of me that I'm not willing to give, and physical is quick, it's easy, it's fun, like let's just do that. So I just think it's really interesting how that's kind of the way that the world works. So that's all I wanted to say.
Yeah. I like what you said, Lauren, about like I ask myself what's going on and like what need, because that is the question that you need to be asking yourself, is because there's a deeper need going on. And I've done this, like something too. I've also done the same thing, basically, like, because anytime I violate my own values, it's tied to some kind of pain or some kind of need that's going unmet. And so you have to get to the root of that.
Yeah, definitely.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think we're in a time where everything's kind of muddled of like what it means to be a Christian when it comes to like sexuality. And so it has to really like, I mean, I think you have to go between you and the Lord of like what that looks like. Like I know the three of us were like, we don't live with our significant others before marriage. We don't have sex with them before marriage. Like we are like, don't take our clothes off. Like,
Right.
you know, like we're like, we hold very, I would say, called conservative values, but it's because we value holiness and we actually value the person in front of us, because we're like, we don't know if you're going to be our husband or not. Like we literally like don't know who we're going to be married to. And obviously we've all dated a lot and we've not married to any of those guys. And like we want to be able to say like, hey, like we honored you well and like honored ourselves well in our dating relationships. And I want to be able to hold that line for like my own husband.
Yeah.
And so it is like a hard line to hold. It's worth it and it's uncomfortable. It is like, it's like you having to say no to things, which who wants to say no to things? But it's because we're like, I value my heart and my body and I'm going to hold it for a specific person that I'll be with the rest of my life. And so, but it's messy. It's messy. And so that's why we're talking about like how far is too far, is because there is this gray area that people are like, well, you can go here, you can go there. And so that's what we're trying to kind of define a little bit better for those listening that want to walk in a way that we're saying you can walk, because we're all three doing it.
Yeah.
Which we should clarify, the part that is clear in the Bible is that you don't have sex before you're married. Which, you know, some people might debate that. I do think you have to look at like, what was the Jewish sexual ethic at the time? What would they have understood? Like, I won't get into like a whole theological thing about it, but just for the sake of like us stating our stance, is we all believe that the Bible sets the parameters for sex, which is inside of covenant. That's what we believe. But like, I think what we're kind of talking about with this question is there's a lot between like nothing and sex. So, and like what Lauren has been saying is Christians are trying to figure that whole area in between out.
Or they're just having sex.
Right. Or they're just having sex.
I think I've heard so many different friends and people, honestly, that I was pretty shocked by, because for the longest time I was just like, oh, everybody thinks the way I think about this. Like, you don't have sex, you like basically had all these things in my head, like, oh, this is what you do. Like, people just get this. And then just, you know, as the years have gone by, just hearing different people's dating experiences. And I knew this girl once and she's like, oh yeah, I'm a virgin, and like told me all this stuff. I was like, oh, awesome. And then she's telling me about an experience she had, and it was definitely not what she had just told me. And I was like, wow, that's pretty different from what you just said, but in her mind, she was like, no, I am technically not a virgin. And I'm like, I would beg to differ. Didn't say anything because it was a very vulnerable moment. But I was like,
Yeah.
okay. And then had some married friends who were like, oh yeah, we like did stuff because we knew we were gonna get married. And I'm like, okay. But you just actually don't know if you're going to get married. Like there's so much that can happen. Like even if you're engaged and the wedding date is set, like that person is not your husband. That person is not your wife. Like you have not committed to them yet in that way. And you can all day long be like, oh, but it's going to happen. But reality is that it hasn't happened yet. So they're not your person yet. So how can you, within like how far is too far, like how can you protect like the marriage bed? The Bible talks about that. Like how can you set yourself up to just to fight for something, because it's not going to be easy, but it's totally worth it. And it's something that you have to really be diligent about.
And I think people want to argue that God is controlling, or Christians are controlling, or the church is controlling, and they're just trying to control everybody from have a terrible life and can have no sex and just be, I don't know, just sexually stunted the rest of your life. I don't know, like crazy crap. And I'm just like, no, I think God actually like loves us. He designed us as sexual beings. He made us for sex. He made us for romance and intimacy and love. Like he's literally, his characteristic that people talk about the most is God is love. God loves us. God loves us. And so if God loves us, he's made us for good things. But he has boundaries between one man, one woman for a reason, for the actual deepest intimacy, to represent like him and the church and his love for us. And so it's like God has like these good things for us. It's just we want to do it in our way and our timing. And it's like he's not trying to control us. He literally is just like, hey, this is like the best way. Now, if you go and have sex outside of marriage or do whatever in between, whatever, like God will forgive you and he loves you. And he's so for every human. I completely believe it. I feel like his grace is enough, but I think we're not made to take advantage of his grace. We're not made to take advantage of God's, whatever, and make up our own ways and rules. It's like, no, God has these things because he actually like is for us and for healthy relationships. And so I get really sad when I hear that people are just like, everyone's trying to control us, or I can just do whatever I want. I get sad on both spectrums because I'm like, I think we're missing God's heart like altogether.
Yeah.
I think we're missing God's character in this, because it really goes back to him at the end of the day. It goes back to our relationship with him, and like, how do we live that out in intimacy with our person that we're dating, in our communities, whatever. Because like I said, these things are behind closed door most of the time when it comes to physical intimacy. So no one's going to see it besides you and your partner and God. And so it's like, it is a personal thing of like figuring out what your convictions are.
And something I wanted to touch on with that, Lauren, is I think that we have just like lost the fear of the Lord in these settings, because it's like, okay, like if Jesus is actually, in the room with you, how are you going to feel? And we have just lost that awareness. And because I think people would act so differently, and it's really sad. And so if people use the argument of like, oh, it's between me and God, I'm like, is it? Like, well, then I think you'd be behaving really differently if that's the case, if there's a healthy fear of the Lord, because you should be checking your boundaries and you should be making sure you're honoring the other person and not just trying to get your needs met. Like there's so much that goes along with that. So yeah.
I was thinking of Philippians 2:12 that says, my dear friends, as you've always obeyed, not only in my presence, but now much more in my absence, continue to work out your salvation with fear and trembling. So like, it's like not taking it lightly and realizing like there's a very real God and he's a very holy God. And how we live our lives needs to be aware of that. Like
Yeah.
he's not, there's kind of been this Jesus that's come into culture that's like he's high-fiving me all the time, and that's not, like he's
Yeah.
not. Like if
Yeah.
I told my youth students this and it didn't land well, but I was like, if you're reading the Bible and it doesn't ever challenge you, you're not reading it correctly.
Yeah.
Like there should be things in there where you're like, oh, like there's a level of conviction from the Holy Spirit that comes. But I was also going to say, like, I think anyone can acknowledge the reality of, like, it is not a good plan for me to follow every single desire that I have. Like, it is absolutely,
oh my gosh, totally.
It is a complete trash plan. Like I would have,
in general, in life.
yeah, like I would have eaten like an entire bag of like Sour Patch Kids and like, like a gallon of ice cream, and definitely not run this morning.
Proud of you.
Like,
whoa, good job.
Thank you
for running.
I dropped that because Coach Flo was
yeah,
here.
She's like, I work out.
She's like,
I'm like,
flex.
yeah, Lauren, I ran this morning.
I'm like,
but like
Brad.
and I wouldn't have worked, like there's so many things that I would have just been like chilling. And so like, I think anybody can acknowledge like that is not a good plan. Like actually you have to have long-term vision and you have to make decisions that are like looking at 10 years, 20 years, 30 years down the road.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what the Bible helps us do, is not live for today and not just follow our every desire, but realize that there's an objective line and God knows what is good because he is goodness. And we have to trust that like he's the one that actually knows what's good for us. And yeah, like that's culture right now is questioning that, but it's not a good plan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
That's good. Callie, I was going to ask you, you wanted earlier when we were all talking, is you wanted to touch a little bit about emotional boundaries and dating, because it's just as important as physical boundaries. Can you share a little bit more about that?
Yeah, definitely.
This gets dodgy in the church sometimes too.
Oh yeah, people get crazy. They say crazy things.
I just mean those church boys. Well, I shouldn't say just the boys, the girls too. But the emotional boundaries, man. Ooh.
Yeah. Emotional boundaries are a tricky one too, especially in the church, because like in a classic example, so many people are like wanting to get married, looking at like, down the road, like, oh, if this person is my husband or this person's my wife, like,
we get weird.
They can start building a life and a fantasy wrapped all around this person, and can just be quick to jump into like things that you're like, we're not even dating. We're not even like boyfriend and girlfriend yet. And you're making we're crossing these emotional boundaries, and I feel way more connected to you than I probably should. So I was just thinking an example in my own life. A couple of years ago, there was this guy I was getting to know, and we had kind of established like there was a little bit of interest on both of our ends, but for different reasons. We're like, I think we just need to be friends. Like, let's keep it there. But we would still hang out and kind of fall back into patterns of like little flirting, like kind of bantery stuff, which honestly, I'm like, that felt fine to me. I didn't feel like we were crossing anything. But then there would just be little things that this guy would do that felt like it was pushing, like majorly pushing like the friend boundary and crossing over into like relationship boundary, like things like he asked like, oh, can I buy you flowers sometime? Like, is that okay? And I was like, no, that's like boyfriend stuff. And he was like, he was like, no, it doesn't have to be like that. And I'm like, no, it would be like that for me, at least. Like, I don't know if you do that with other people, but that would be weird. And then like later he tried something else with like, I think we were just hanging out, and he's like, oh, would you like want to dance or something? And I was like, no. Like, how is that not romantic? He was like, no, it doesn't have, again, he's like, it doesn't have to be like that. I'm like, how is that not romantic. Yeah, I was like, no, that's boyfriend stuff. And then there was another time where we were like sitting next to each other and he's just like, oh, like if you want to like lean your head against my shoulder or something, like that's fine. And I was like, no. Like I just kept being like this is not a friendship like boundary. This is boyfriend girlfriend boundary. And he tried to make a like case for why it didn't have to be like that. But I was like, first of all, I don't really believe your side that it wouldn't be crossing anything for you, that you wouldn't feel like you're my boyfriend. But I'm like, if that's true, okay, that's your thing. But I'm like, for me, I know that I would be going into the spot of like, oh, I'm creating this space in my heart for you that's reserved for a boyfriend.
Yeah.
And it's going to be a way for me to get my needs met. And that's unfair to you. That's unfair to me. And if someone comes along who is interested in me, I'm probably going to feel like I already have a boyfriend.
Yeah.
Because you've been meeting these needs. And so that was one of the most like, I think emotional boundary crossing scenarios that I experienced. But do you guys have any of your own experiences or any thoughts that you'd like to share?
I just wanted to compliment you, Callie, because
you compliment me on these all the time. I thought that the other day. I was like, Andrew,
you need it, Callie. You're worthy. You're worthy.
I need to scale it back.
Never.
I mean, you don't have to stop.
Trey. Let the people know.
I could literally just talk this whole podcast about how great Lauren and Callie are. I love them both.
Callie, or Dre, I want to hear. What do you want to say?
All I was going to say is, Callie, good job, because I think in the moment, like, of course you want to dance with him, you know? Like, it would have been easy to be like,
I don't know.
Okay, sure, if you don't say so. What? She wanted to dance with him?
Oh, no. I'm saying I wouldn't have wanted to dance with him.
Lauren's like, no.
No dancing. Okay, continue.
Yeah.
Did you want to dance with him, Callie?
Honestly, in that scenario, no, because it's kind of awkward. And I was just like, what are you doing? So no, not in that one. But
yeah. Well, there's moments I feel like where it's easy to be like, oh, they're excusing it, so I'm going to excuse it. So I just love that you were like, no, we're not going to excuse this. That's all I was going to say.
Totally. Well, thank you.
Yeah. You stood your ground on like what you believed was the boyfriend girlfriend scenario.
Totally. But yeah, it can just be like I think a good question to ask yourself too is like, oh, if I had a boyfriend, like would they be comfortable with me doing this with somebody?
Yeah.
Like that's a really good, I think, barometer, whether it's physical, whether it's emotional, whether it's things that you're sharing, just being like, oh, because if you feel awkward about it, then there's probably a reason why. So yeah,
for sure.
Yeah, I think for sure, like when it comes to like men and women and emotional boundaries, it's like, I think in a dating relationship, it progresses, right? Like you're progressing in those connections. And I think some people even, they want to push the emotional or spiritual connection, like really, really quickly to have that connection. Just what we were talking about with physical. And I think I've felt that at times where I've been like, can we just like have fun? Like, can we just like, I don't want to do my whole life story on our first date. Like,
right.
And I would say I used to be like that because I thought I didn't know how to date. So I was like, tell me how you met Jesus. Like, and I think there's times for all of that. And that's super fun. But it's like, there's a progression when it comes to getting to know someone. And some people, they fall in love super fast. My sister, I think after like 2 weeks knew she was going to marry her husband, and they're married, and she's about to have a baby tomorrow, I think.
Tomorrow?
No, like literally. I think she's getting induced tomorrow. So it's actual.
Anytime. Wow.
Like Lord bless her.
Tomorrow at 11.
Bless sweet Megan.
Meggers, we love you.
She had a whirlwind romance, and I love the word whirlwind.
Yeah, anyways. Lauren's really been dropping that phrase lately.
I'm like, that person's in a whirlwind. But anyways, what I was going to say with that is like, they probably really fast tracked that emotional connection. And so I understand that does happen in dating relationships, but to me, I like a slow burn. I'm like, let's take our time sharing stories. Let's take our time getting to know each other, because that feels really safe for my heart.
Yeah.
Of like, we're building and building and building, and it's building trust. It's building some type of commitment. And it's okay if you're not ready, or that other person's not ready sharing a part of their life yet. Like sometimes it's like, hey, I'm just not ready to share that intimate part of me. And that's okay. And I think it's like someone who's going to respect those boundaries of emotional, physical, whatever. That's a huge sign of health. But eventually you are going to have to be emotionally vulnerable in your relationships and to share parts of you. And that's what will bring that connection, is when you're sharing the scary crap about you, because we all have scary crap that we have to share eventually with our partner. You can't just hide it all. So yeah,
it's true. Shoot, I just had a thought. What was I gonna say?
Whirlwind
romance.
I feel like I said it very discreetly.
I was gonna say, if you guys haven't listened to the Intimacy Ladder, Jason Valentin talk about the Intimacy Ladder.
So good.
It is one of the best podcasts on dating you will ever hear, because he talks about how at each phase of dating you're answering different questions, and he basically outlines how to pace your dating relationship so that you're not, like Lauren was saying, like divulging like all this intense stuff on the first date. So I'll put that in the show notes for you all.
Honestly,
what a boss.
Good. So good.
Yeah. This kind of circles back to the how far is too far question a little bit, but I do feel like it's kind of the wrong question to be asking, because
explain more.
Love it.
Because I feel like most of the time when people are asking that question, it's like, how much can I of how far is too far. It's kind of like, how close can I get to the line and still, like, you know, be technically okay? And the real question that you need to be asking is, how can I do my best to honor God and to honor this person in front of me?
Yep.
Yeah.
And that is, a lot of times it's not going to be skirting right up to the line. Like, you know, like, it's like, yeah, like, how do I go above and beyond to honor, even like, I honestly, I'll think about like, okay, their future wife, I don't know who she is yet. I don't know if it's me. I don't know if it's somebody else. Like, I want to be able to like look her in the eyes one day and be like, you know, like, I did my best with this man to like honor his boundaries and honor like your relationship with
one
him.
day you're gonna look at yourself in the mirror and be like, you did amazing.
Incredible job.
Incredible job.
Let it be, God. Not that I'm ever planning on like looking any of my exes
wives in the eye.
Yeah, it's more like a imagery thing.
It's
I get
metaphorical. Yeah. It's,
no, Andrea, I'm gonna find these women and be like, Andrea has something to say to you. Look her in the eye.
I'm like asking them to hold eye contact for like 5 minutes, like uninterrupted. No.
Oh my gosh, I can't. That'd be so crazy. Anyways,
so
okay.
Weird.
I love your intensity. We love that.
Yeah, always. But yeah, no, I've like, if I just yeah, in every relationship it's like, okay, am I honoring the Lord? And I talked about like how I've cried like multiple times because of like going too farther than I wanted to. And I also don't want to pretend like I totally blame him. Like, it takes two to
1000%.
tango in these situations. But all I was gonna say is, when I would cry, like, I was like, I do not, like, whatever I do, I'm not going to numb myself to this. Like, I do not want to numb myself to this feeling of like sadness and grief, because I want to stay sensitive to the Holy Spirit. And like, I want to feel it when he's because it's so gentle. Like, it's so like, hey, babe, like, what are you doing? I feel like it's something like that. Like, hey, what are you doing, honey? It's this fatherly, this isn't who you are kind of thing. And I never want to get to the point where I numb myself to that. Like, I'm like, I want to hear that when like my dad corrects me, like, because he like loves me more than anybody. So I don't know why I'm getting emotional. I love Jesus.
Yeah.
It's so good.
It's the tenderness before God, right? Like,
Yeah.
we want to stay connected to him. We don't want to shut off his voice. We don't want to shut off intimacy with him. It's the most important thing for anything that we do in our lives. And so
yeah. And it's like, it actually feels so good to have someone that cares. Like they say this with like parenting, like the kids that have such a hard time are the ones whose parents just let them do like whatever the crap they want, and they're like sneaking out of their window and sleeping with whoever, and they're like, where were my parents? Like, what happened? Why didn't they care if I came home or not? And so like, I think in those moments, like having a dad that was like, hey, I care about you, and like, this isn't who you are, and like, I have like a vision for you that's like way bigger, like, it's just like, it's like this conviction, but like this love that you feel at the same time.
That's so good.
So good, Andrea. And I just wanted to say something about Andrea. She loves being convicted more than anyone I know. And this woman has lived one of like the purest lifestyles I've ever known. But we'd go to church together, and she would, the pastor would be talking, and she's crying in the corner, and she's like, oh, I'm just getting convicted. And I'm like, about what? What do you have to be convicted about? But something I love so much about you is just your heart towards the Lord. And like you said, you don't numb yourself, and you're always like, where am I off, or can I be more aligned with the Lord in some way?
Yeah.
And
that's so good.
It's so beautiful. And it's one of my favorite things about you. So
yeah. And I think what I love is about you, Dre, and I think it's such a beautiful thing for people who are following Jesus to see, is I don't think you're trying to live this perfect life. I think you actually want connection to God. Like, you're like, I'll do whatever it takes to be known by him and to be right with him. Not so that you can win points with God or be a better Christian than anyone else. I really think you like could care less who knows you, who like knows about how you live for God. It's like, you're like, I just want to know that me and God are connected, and we are in love, and I'm following him, and I'm honoring his ways. And so because of that, whenever that feels off, your heart is grieved because you feel his grief. And so I think that's such a good way for people to see, is like, we're not trying to be like, oh, we're better than you, or like, I'm trying to like do this holy life so I can be better. We're really like, no, we're just so in love with Jesus. Like, we literally have laid down our lives for him, and we believe he has a way that is very opposite of this world and culture, but because it's like, it's a way better way. At the end of the day, it's way better, and it's way more life-giving, and it's way more fruitful than like the fast track of like, get whatever you want, do whatever you want, be whatever you want. And so that's like why we are living like these laid down lives. And so that's all I want to say.
Well, and if you think about like, when you have like this relationship with someone where it's like so like deep, and you know how much they care, like, and you've experienced like the most love from like that source than anyone else, like, and then you think about like, oh, I did something to grieve his heart, like it really is like, it's so beyond rules at that point. Like, it's literally just relational. Like, you're just like, I'm so sorry that hurt you. Like, ugh.
Yeah. Which I think even goes to like back into our boundaries with or whoever we date, emotionally, physically, is like, we're here to honor that person. Like, we don't want to hurt them at the end of the day. And so that's why we're like, I don't want to be hurt. I don't want you to hurt me. I don't want to hurt the other person. So it's like respecting that other person in front of you, which takes a lot of self-control and a lot of conversations.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah, for sure.
And
Callie, I feel like you have stuff. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
You're right. I do. How did you know? But I think too, with Christian dating, at least the way that we're trying to do it, we believe like the biblical model is it's like laying your life down for the other person. And so at the end of the day, it's not about you getting your needs met. It's about how can I love this other person in front of me? How can I lay my life down for them? How can I protect them? And so I don't know. I think just within dating, like, yeah, there's moments where that kind of stuff comes up of like, oh, I have this need that I want to get met. But you got to look at that thing and be like, okay, I'm going to lay that down right now, or I need to step away for a bit, whatever that looks like, in order to serve this other person the way that they need to be served and like loved. Something I was really inspired by the other day. I have this friend who's been married for a couple of years, and she was going on a rant that I was all for. But she was saying like, she's like, yeah, like sex within marriage. She's like, or she was just, I think she was just saying sex in general. But she's like, culture tells you it is all about getting your needs met. Are you being satisfied? It's so selfish. She's like, marriage is not that at all. Like when you're having sex, it is about the other person. It is, how am I loving them? How can I do all these things? And she's like, it is not about you at all. And she's like, and it is the most beautiful thing. And she's like that I've ever experienced. And I was like, that is so powerful and so beautiful. And she's like, and when you're actually both like your priority is the other person, like that is when you have the best sex. Because she's like, it's just not selfish at all. It is about the other person. And she's like, it's about laying your life down again, which we've said multiple times. But I thought that was so beautiful. So
yeah. I love that.
So good.
So I was going to say one practical thing that has helped me with physical boundaries is if there is something I'm doing with my boyfriend, that I don't have right now, but
hypothetically,
and in the past when I've had one, if there's something that I'm like, I don't want this to be in the light, like I don't want to tell Callie and Lauren about it, then that is a sign that it's maybe crossing the line. Because why do I not want to bring it into the light? So I don't know, that's been one thing that's really helped me gauge like that line, I guess, between there's obviously like so much space like we talked about between nothing and having sex, but yeah, if there's something I don't want to tell these two. But you have to have people that you like actually respect the standard that they're living at, because there's going to be some people that you tell stuff to and they're like, they don't care, or they're like high-fiving you. So like
totally. I think the respect piece is like the voices that like they're going to say truth to me.
Yep.
So
yeah. Well, and it's like Callie and Lauren both live at like a standard that I am happy to live at, like I'm like, I want to live at this standard. Like,
same to you. Don't you worry.
Yeah.
Like, oh my gosh. And we're not perfect. We messed up. I've had to confess things to these two, and I'm like, I did this. Hello.
But even Lauren, like you confess, and that's like a big. That's what. Like, it's inspired me to confess, because I'm like, Lauren confesses to me, I got to confess to her.
That's because I'm like, I don't want anything hidden. Like, right. It grows. So
and shame. That's how shame gets a hold on you.
We don't need none of that.
We don't need that.
And I've also confessed, just want to throw that in there, about different things. So yes.
Callie's a big sinner here. And
we forgive her. Like we don't even talk about hers. It's too much.
Guys, just pray for Callie. That's all we're going to say. Okay.
Oh my gosh.
I need it. Confessing every day.
Hey, and that's the beautiful thing is like, okay, when you're going after dating, you're gonna mess things up, like whatever, emotionally, whatever. It's like a hot mess because you have two humans coming together trying to figure it out, and
with
you
their
have
baggage,
with their baggage, the
with
bag,
their baggage,
and their
Yeah,
flags.
thank you.
Their baggage and their flagage and their dragons. Dragons.
Except you didn't say the last
Yeah, I was
Okay,
like, she
okay,
said
right.
dragons.
Dragons. Whatever that means. But I'm like, it's gonna be messy and we're gonna mess up. And that's where the power of confession, honestly, even to whoever you're dating, like confessing, and to whoever you married to, is like to confess your sins. Like that's so huge.
Yeah.
And then also to your friends, like the power of just being like, I did this, like, yeah, I need God. Like I need his help. I'm like, we're gonna be doing that the rest of our life.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
well, I would love to hear real, and then we'll wrap it up. But what would you all say to a friend or to anyone listening who's felt like I've gone too far in my relationships, like physically, emotionally, and maybe they're carrying shame about that, or they're just like, I don't know what to do. Like I've gone too far.
So to the people that have like crossed the line or like want to go back, I would say just start with confessing, like we just talked about, and repenting. Like that may sound like, I don't know, a very old word, but it's just literally being like, oh, I'm like, it's between you and the Lord and between you and the other person, of course, but just being like, I'm really sorry that I crossed this boundary and I want to change it, because that's what repentance is. It's like changing your course. And just scaling back if you need to take, you just figure out what you need. If you need, like, okay, our boundary was here, let's move it over here, and just try to set yourself up for success as much as possible. I had some friends who were like, oh, we were just doing a little too much kissing, and we were both like, we need to take a break for a while. Like, again, and it's like, oh, they were kissing. Some people can be like, that's like nothing. But it's like, oh, for them, it was crossing some kind of boundary, and they just needed to scale back again to protect each other. And that's great. So I think finding what is going to work for you guys is really important. Can't talk. Telling people, keeping it in the light is massive as well. And then, just asking Jesus too, because maybe he will, I don't know, maybe he'll tell you like, I think you need to scale back a little bit in this area or change your boundary. Like keeping the Lord involved always is really important. But yeah, Andrea, did you have any other thoughts along those lines?
I would say to somebody who has crossed the line, and I think like the hard thing, because all of us feel like, so we're just very like, we just really love Jesus. Like, and we can get really intense because we're coming up against this narrative of culture.
And it's so intense.
Yeah.
Yes. And it's not because we're trying to come up against people that have made mistakes really intensely.
No.
It's because we're trying to come up against that narrative that has been blasted at everybody like all day long.
24/7. So, Instagram, Facebook, marketing,
Netflix.
Everything is just sex. Everything is sex and porn right now.
Right.
It feels like. So
So we're not saying it as people who have done it perfectly, and we're not saying it as people that have no compassion for people that have messed up, because we're like, we're right there with you. Like we have fallen short of the standard that, we in different ways. But so I would just say, like, if you hear our intensity, know that it's not because we don't have compassion for people that have like crossed the line. Like I totally get it. Like there are times when it just feels overwhelming, and you like are in the back of your mind, your convictions are there somewhere. But like the strongest feeling you have is just like, screw it. I don't care. It's like sometimes you are literally like, that's why I think it says flee from sexual immorality, because sometimes that is literally the only thing you can do. So I understand like what happens, and that, like some pain is just so there that you're like, I just want relief from this pain, or I just want to fill this need, and I just need connection or whatever. There's so many reasons that that people might cross a line. And so just understand that like we totally get that, and we understand like that it's not like a necessarily like easy thing to follow this standard all the time. But that's where grace comes in, is when, you know, like you don't meet the standard that you want to, or you don't live the way that like the Bible lines out for us to live. So there's definitely grace, but like Lauren said, grace doesn't mean we like go around sinning all we want. Like, but grace does come in to cover you when you fall short of the standard. And like Callie said, when you come with a repentant heart, like he says that he, you know, he removes your sin like as far as the east is from the west. So he's forgiving, and so that's like his promise to you, is that you always have access to forgiveness if you come to him with a repentant heart. So and forgiveness means that you get a clean slate, like, you know, like he's not holding your sins against you.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, physical intimacy is very needed in a romantic relationship. It's just like, where's that line of physical intimacy? Like, it's really beautiful kissing or holding hands, cuddling, you know, it's just like flirting, whatever. Like, that is the basis. Like, that's the difference between you dating someone and not everyone else. Like, it's for that person. And so it's really beautiful. Dancing. There's all types of physical intimacy that you can do. A genre. I like running. That's my physical intimacy with people.
People are like, what?
I like
I went on a run with her.
I was like, that was awesome. Okay. Anyways, so with that, there's a time and space for everything. But what I was going to say is, if you feel convicted of like, yeah, I don't think I want to be doing these physical things like with the person I'm dating, is having that conversation and being honest. And if that person can respect those boundaries and like work on like holding whatever that line is and that boundary with you, that's a good person. Like, that is like a green flag. And if that person is going to push back on any boundaries that you put up, that is huge red flag. Like, that means that they can't respect your body or respect like your needs, because there's going to be times in your marriage where you know, you don't want to have sex for whatever reason. And can they respect that? If they're not respecting you in your dating relationship about physical boundaries, like, it's going to get only crazier when you're in marriage. And so you need to find someone that is going to really say like, yeah, I want to honor and respect like what you're asking right now. Because usually if you're asking for it, is not because you're trying to withhold from that person. It's because you're like, these are my convictions about my body or my convictions about my heart. And so you want a guy that's going to respect that. And if he can't, then that, I'm like, I don't know if you should be in that relationship. And so it's hard too, because the thing is like, you can change your mind, right? Like, we can change our minds on what our boundaries are the next week. And so that's why you have to keep communicating in your relationships.
Yeah. And a little hack that I think I gave to Lauren too is, when you know that you need to have a boundaries conversation, you text them, hey, before we kiss again, we need to talk.
I don't know if I use that. I think I just was like, we got to talk.
Yeah, you don't have to do it exactly like that, but just throw it out there that you would like to talk about something, because otherwise what can happen is you see them and then you're just like, oh, I didn't really need to talk about anything. So that's something that I have done, has been like, okay, if we need to talk about boundaries, I'm going to tell them we need to talk about boundaries next time we are in person.
For sure. So I think that's all I have to say for today.
Me too. Cal?
Yeah, that's it.
we covered that, man.
Yeah.
Extensively.
Okay. Yeah.
Good job.
Well,
I don't think we went too far in like covering it, but just like
just the right amount, like
just
right amount. Gray area
is too far when it comes to covering this question. Yeah. Well, if you're listening, We love you. And we hope that this feels like encouraging. I hope you feel like our compassion too. And we just cover you. We just pray that Jesus would like bring that gentle conviction in the places that he needs to, but that you would also feel his comfort and his grace over your life.
Yeah.
In Jesus' name. That was just an impromptu prayer, guys.
Well,
I
There
just
you go.
felt it.
Amen.
The
I felt it.
charismatic in me just went with it, you know?
So good.
So good.
Yes, we love you, and we will talk to you later.
Bye.
Bye.